I'm Alexander Verbeek, a freelance journalist passionate about preserving the environment. This summer, I walked the Camino de Santiago to better understand the impact of climate change along this historical route. The Alto del Perdon is a famous stop in the north of Spain on the Camino Francés. At the summit of this hill of forgiveness is a renowned iron sculpture of pilgrims battling against the western winds on their way to Santiago de Compostela. And it is at this windy spot that Navarra built its first onshore wind turbines in 1994. The wind park made this region a leader in both the production and the use of renewable energy. Seeing these giants towering above me gave me hope that we are taking steps to move away from our dependence on fossil fuels. Therefore, I wanted to understand more about new and emerging technologies. Those questions brought me here to this beautiful park, very close to Swiss Re in Zurich, in Switzerland. And I'm going to ask some questions to Michele Cibrario. He's the co-lead for the Center of Competence on Renewable Energy at Swiss Re. He's the best expert to ask questions how the reinsurance company is dealing with the new and old challenges of renewable energy. So how is climate change impacting the production of renewable energy?
Let me give you an example. Say you own a solar panel and one morning the sun does not shine. And that's not too bad, right? You know, at home you plug in from the grid and you're fine. But if you are a utility scale solar plant in the middle of the countryside and you have a contract, then that is a problem. So we have come up with a concept. So if the sun on average shines less than what was expected, we come in with a payout. Let's keep it simple, right? Yeah. So that's one. Same for lack of water for hydro dams. That's something we can do. So that is lack of precipitation, right? That also has an impact on agriculture. And then same for lack of wind. Yeah. And that is something that climate change has the potential to impact significantly.
Yeah. And now I can imagine that you can have one year, you have more sun and the next year less sun, but sometimes there's like a long-term trend. So for instance, we have hydro dams, and I'm thinking now particularly about the southwest of the US, at the Page Dam and the Hoover Dam, where there's consistently less and less water, although this year, 2023, might be an exception, but it's getting lower and lower. How do you deal with those kind of problems?
So climate change is creating the situation in a few sectors where insurers and reinsurers have to really do the math correctly, form a view, and nobody wants to restrict coverage, but it comes at a point where it's really difficult. I'm thinking to the return period of flood, right? When you have major floods on a repetitive basis, you really need to be sure that you know how much you are exposed for, right? On a portfolio level. So that's a little bit the tricky part of climate change. That's on one side, and on the other side, you might have a bonanza of for example, solar in parts that are already semi-desert, semi-desertic, right? So from that point of view, that could actually be a plus, right? But then you need to be careful of storms that might be stronger. Because the heat on average is higher, so difficult to foresee all the implications, right?
Yeah, but Swiss Re is probably one of the best experts in the world in cracking all the data and finding the patterns of how this is developing and how that this is impacting companies.
Well, there is a lot of pride on the NatCat analyst, and the team that we have is really strong. And a few years ago, we have taken the decision to invest and grow an in-house team, whereas in other cases, the market have developed specialized firms. Let me give you an example. In offshore Taiwan, there are very few energy installations traditionally, because that's not an area that was explored extensively by oil and gas companies. So the offshore is relatively pristine, and there is now a push by the domestic industry to develop offshore wind farms because it makes perfect sense. But you are in Typhoon Alley, Yeah? And the way that typhoons will develop has a consequence directly of climate change, will impact how much infrastructure, what kind of infrastructure we can collectively install and ensure there, how far away, how much spaced out they need to be one from the other, how much, what kind of share of the risk every reinsurer can take.
Are you also involved in hydro? I know you are, but how's this trend developing?
So the mini hydro is very much in fashion, especially for those countries that have already a substantial installed infrastructure base of hydro dams, right? So it comes quite simply to say that the best spots, the best locations are already taken. So when you develop a mini hydro, micro hydro in an area which is not super suitable, you need to be very careful what you're doing. And it comes down to the fact that you could have unexpected events or events that have a return period higher than what you thought, and potential for damages, of course, is significant, even if the investment itself is quite small. So that's the same for geothermal, and for a few other technologies that historically have been there, right? For example, on one thing I've heard recently about using renewable energy sources to carry out investments in the area of district heating, right? Very smart, but you need to get your grid of heat distribution properly done. In some areas you need to dig very deep because you have permafrost, and if you don't do it in the right way, more than 3 meters depth and all of that, you end up with ice damaging the pipes, right? So there are, every one of these technologies has a potential for development, will contribute massively to the energy transition, but things need to be done in the right way, and no shortcuts allowed.
Are you hopeful for the future?
Definitely. I think you can sense a lot of optimism. Also because I have the privilege, together with my colleagues, to sit in a position in Swiss Re where we really see the projects happening, right? We see the skills and the technologies of these developers being applied. We see best practices spreading from one project to the other. We try to influence that heavily, to play our role, to play our part. And I would definitely say strong optimism.
Yeah, that is lovely to hear. What are the main risks that you see that might threaten this future optimism?
Yeah, we need to have a little bit of luck, right? Every industry needs to come to terms with prototypical elements, and that's one thing. So we need to have the luck to discover the problems with the technologies as early as possible. We want to make sure that the energy transition comes cost effective. It's a pity to see enormous investments and very good skills being wasted because just of a little bit of bad luck of having a row of natural catastrophes, one after the other, battering a construction site, right? A construction site is fragile by definition. So if you have a little bit of luck, and you don't have natural catastrophes on construction sites, then that's already good enough. Right? So the optimism comes with a bit of realism as well. We need to make sure that this energy transition comes in the most efficient way, without wasting resources on technologies that are shaky. We need, I think, from the point of view of the banks, we want to work, and we are part of the financial system. We need to make sure that collectively there is a constant supply of investments to this sector. It's risk-taking. There needs to be a little bit of a bold approach, and we try to do it in a sensible manner.
Well, thank you so much. This has been very enlightening in many ways. It gives a lot of hope, and it gives a lot of insight in how Swiss Re is helping in the worldwide transition phase that we are in, and I think it's an essential element in the whole movement that we are all in. And yes, indeed, it does give a lot of hope. And yes, we also need a little bit of luck. So thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have this nice chat, and I'm glad you had your piece of the walk of the Camino de Santiago, and that triggered our discussion, right?
Thank you very much. Buen camino, as they say when you're in Spain.
Buen camino, Alexander.
Thank you very much.